Episode content may seem deep and at times heavy. We strongly encourage all listeners to check our show notes for detailed descriptions, and as always, please take care of yourself. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast.
Let us tell you why.
First, it's free, and free is one of our favorite words. Right, Evie?
Right.
It's so cool. Anchor has creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. And Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and so many more. Want to know the most amazing part?
Yes!
You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership.
Wow!
Seriously, Anchor gives you everything you need to make a podcast right in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. So far, nothing in life has ever stung me like death has. Nothing has ever woken me up so quickly and so slowly, all at the same time. To experience loss is to experience something which is nearly indescribable. And yet, here I am in my closet wearing my pajamas, talking to you, trying to share my experience. This week on episode 4, we're talking loss. Because in many ways, loss is the origin story of I'm Wearing Pajamas. The day I lost my dad, something in me burned away and died too. And it was in those ashes and through that loss that I discovered legacy. In many ways, loss turned me into a phoenix. On the more global scale, we're talking loss because as humans, it's something we will all experience. And I think it's important to have healthy, productive, and effective conversations about things that are bound to fucking happen. Guys, stick around to hear all about discovering legacy and loss. Learn how to support someone through loss. Learn some key steps to take in processing loss. And I want to share with you how I am still moving through grief. Death changed my entire life. And I imagine at some point, if it hasn't happened already, it will touch yours too. Put on your comfy clothes, grab a snack, definitely get some tissues, and let's talk about what happens when it's an end, but it isn't your end. About 10 years ago, I was out on a walk one Wednesday morning, and around 8 a.m., I noticed I had a missed call from my sister, and I immediately knew something was wrong. We are not call-type people. We are text people. We always text. And, unless we need an answer quickly or something big happens, that's really when we call, and that day, something big happened. Walking down the middle of the road, just a couple streets over, actually, from my childhood home, my sister told me that my dad had died in his sleep. Somehow I kept walking. I actually feel like it was kind of meant to be that I had to walk to go home. I wasn't driving. I wasn't already at home. I was out. I was away. And I had to use my own 2 legs to make it home. So I eventually made it home, and a few hours later, I found myself sitting alongside my sister Erin and a couple of my uncles in a local funeral home answering questions about my dad's life. What was his date of birth? Where did he live? Who did he live with? What did he do for work? What were some of his favorite hobbies? How many children did he have? What did he do for fun? Answering questions about my dad caused me to flash forward in my mind and imagine how my loved ones might one day answer those questions about me. What was her date of birth? Where did she live? Who did she live with? What did she do for work? What were some of her favorite hobbies? How many children did she have? What did she do for fun? Was she happy? That last question was honestly never asked by the funeral home, but it kept ringing loudly in my head. And that day, after wondering if my dad died happy, I asked myself, if I were to die tomorrow, what would I leave behind? What would my legacy look like? Would I die happy? So 10 years ago, I was working as a nanny. I wasn't fulfilled. I was in an unhealthy relationship. I was still battling severe anxiety and depression. I had a drinking problem, which probably explains some of the anxiety and depression. And overall, I was mostly stuck in suffering. If I had died that instant, I knew I wouldn't be proud of what I would have left behind. Because I knew I was capable of so much more. Like, I just knew. I knew I was destined to do more than just be fake and pay bills and die. Like I watched my dad do, and like I watched so many people do. In the depths of my being, I knew there was more to life. So I set out on this journey to just be happy. like that was it. That's it. Just be happy. And I chose that because I figured it was simple and it sounded doable. So on the day my dad died, I made a promise to myself that I would never again do anything that pulled away from my happiness. So 1 week after my dad died, I quit my nanny job to become a yoga teacher. The people closest to me thought I was nuts. My mom actually suggested I go back to school and get a real job because I think at that time that's what my sister was doing, and that seemed like a safe path for her, and it was. And actually then my then boyfriend told me that becoming a yoga teacher was a waste of time, it was a waste of energy, and a waste of money. I chose to ignore them both, and I opted to do what felt just most right to me. You know, and I say that, I want to say this, so the people who love us and they want the best for us, sometimes that means they also get scared for us too. And so sometimes that means that when they project their love is backed by fear. And so sometimes we get to teach others courage by taking massive action ourselves. So like for me, this was step one of me coming undone. This was step one of me choosing myself and of playing a more active role in my legacy. Now, I'll be honest, it's always a little sad to say that I came to life the day my dad died, but that's the truth. And honestly, sharing him and his life and his death that's my way of staying connected to him. I almost imagine it like this, like I see it like in his last few moments, the very last of his essence, he chose to like send it out into the universe, and somehow I inhaled it, and it helped me to see life in this brand new way. It was like I came alive in a weird way. And losing my dad in my early 20s, it quickly taught me the value of life, of time, of moments, of people, and of legacy. Loss really, it forced me to reflect. And so right now, I want to invite you into that space. I want to invite you into the space of reflection, of looking at your life, of looking at and maybe imagining your legacy. So let's start just looking at the inevitable. Let's start looking at what we will leave behind. So take a big, deep breath in. And a big, deep breath out. And then consider, if you were to die tomorrow, what would you leave behind? And if you were to die tomorrow, let me say that again. If you were to die tomorrow, would you die happy? Now we're going to finish this reflection out with another breath. Take a deep breath in. And deep breath out. Now, wherever you find yourself with your answers is perfectly fine. If for some reason you find yourself dissatisfied with your answers, then the good news is you have the power and the time. If you're listening to this right now, you still have time to create change. Keep listening to learn how. All stories, even the ones we love, must eventually come to an end. And when they do, it's only an opportunity for another story to begin. This is one of my most favorite quotes, and it was spoken by Eric Applebaum in the film Mr. Megorium's Wonder Emporium. Guys, I love this movie. So for those who don't know, Mr. Megorium's Wonder Emporium is about a 243-year-old eclectic magic toy shop owner who recognizes an opportunity for his apprentice Molly. And he recognizes that there's an opportunity for Molly to shine because he knows that his time in life is coming to an end. So in Mr. Megorium's attempt to pass along his magic toy store, the magic in the shop slowly begins to fade. And as Molly watches the shop's magic fade, she lets hers fade too. Now, guys, this is a really common story that we see all the time play out in real life. We see it in fiction, but we also see it in real life. And the story is, it's this story of someone's light going out or someone's light beginning to go out. And then as a result, someone else turns their own light off. Now, I've given a light analogy on the show before about turning a light on and having it spread to other places. What I didn't tell you, though, is that this light work also works in reverse. When you turn a light off, it also pulls away from other spaces. So just like when we turn that light on, it starts to spill over. Consider when we start to turn lights off, they pull light away. So in this example from the film, as Mr. Megorium's light is going out, Molly feels so sad and just so stuck and then unable to move forward without him that's when her own light begins to dim. And it's just such a beautiful film. And I bring it up today because it eloquently explores this delicate subject of moving on after a loved one has passed, of moving on when life feels just unbearable, and really of moving on when grief is heavily present. And I really love how they share it in the film because something that no one talks about, and no one will tell you about grief, except me, I'm telling you today, is that grief gives you opportunity. The opportunity to move forward or not. And really the opportunity to discover who you are and who you can become. So if you haven't seen the movie, I'm just going to keep spoiling it here for you. In the film, when grief first showed up for Molly, she did what most people do. She denied its existence, and she did everything that she could to convince Mr. Megorium that he was fine, and he could not leave the world just yet. And when she couldn't acknowledge Mr. Megorium's impending departure, Molly stayed pretty stuck. And guys, the reason she stayed stuck is because we can't hide from grief. And when we try to hide from it, grief will actually keep us trapped. And my friend Eric actually said it in this way, and he said, it can drown you. Grief can drown you. And the reason that can happen is when we try to run away from it, when we try to hide, it can keep us stuck. And so what we must do actually is we must actually welcome the grief. Grief must be felt in this weird way. I know it's weird, but it must be welcomed because grief must be processed. And I know it's easier said than done, and I know this because, guys, I'm walking through this myself. And I'm here with you. And that's why we're doing this work together, because it's really, really big. And big work is always so much easier when it's done together. So whether you're in the thick of grief right now, or maybe you're on the outskirts, like you've been there, but you're not close by. Or maybe grief even seems like foreign territory to you. Maybe you're listening to this and you're like, what? I want you to know, wherever you find yourself, that you can walk this path alone, but you don't have to. And that's eventually what Molly learns in the film. She learns actually after giving up, after being sad for a short time, and honestly, after nearly selling the Emporium. She nearly sells the store. After all that, Molly eventually discovers that she has the magic within her. And she's able to reignite the Wonder Emporium. She brings it back to life and then continues operation. So now we want to know, how did she get from point A to point B, right? This feels like the right time to talk about it, like just powerful ways to move through grief, because that's what we're wondering, right? How did Molly move from stuck to unstuck? What happened? Okay, well, first, I think it's important to acknowledge she's not real, so this happened right in like a 90-minute time period, but she's a character. But second, the character in the story had some tools, okay? Now, prior to this episode, I reached out to my social media followers like I commonly do, and I asked how they moved through grief themselves. And I received some really great responses. And so I think the best way to have this discussion and to keep me on track will be to do it like this. So we're going to use a feedback model called Keep, Stop, Start. I love this model because it's simple. And this should help us to keep our grief chat productive and then leave you with things to keep doing, things to stop doing, and some things to start doing. I learned the Keep, Stop, Start model in yoga teacher training, and typically we use this for feedback purposes in teaching yoga, but I actually find it, can be applied to so much more than just teaching, and I'll show you how right now. Okay. So let's talk about some keeps. What are some things we can keep doing to move ourselves through grief? So these are some keeps that my personal friends or social media followers, this is what people are already doing. So the first keep is crying. This was the most common answer I got, and I was actually so relieved that this was pretty common to hear, that most people process their grief through crying a lot. And like I talked on our previous episode, crying, just like urinating and defecating, is so important, just like sweating, because it's one of very few ways that you can release things from your body. So I actually had a client this morning. I said, how you feeling? And she said, oh, I might start crying. And my response to her today was, good. Good. Let it out. Because most often I feel like the response that we hear when someone's like, oh, I'm going to cry, we think, oh no, honey, don't do that. And I'm here to tell you, like, please cry, please let it out however you need to. So another keep that we want to keep doing is using music as a way to help us move through grief so that we don't stay stuck. Lastly, another keep is inward reflection. And I liked that my commenters had different ways of getting there. So some people chose to get to inward reflection via therapy. Some people use meditation, and other people are using journaling. So these are our keeps. Crying. Keep using music. And then using inward reflection to move yourself forward through grief. Okay, so those are excellent. This is a great place to start. So, or to keep going, really. So now, what are some stops? So these are the things that people told me they did, and then most people even followed up with, this is what I did, but I do not recommend it. So some stops. These are what we're going to stop doing. We're going to stop running away and numbing out. We're going to stop ignoring our grief and turning to anger or violence. So I talked just a moment ago about using music. What I want you to be conscious about doing is stop just using sad fucking music. Some of you know I'm like talking right to you. And I'm talking right to you because that was me through like all my teenage years. I used to listen to all this sad music. And then I wondered why I was so fucking depressed all the time. It's because I was like putting myself in this environment of like constant sad music in addition to all the other things I was feeling. So I don't mind you listening to sad music, but balance it out with some healthy, uplifting music. Now, the last thing I'm going to leave you here with, actually two more things. So another thing we have to stop doing with grief is stop isolating ourselves. And I think that's going to be another thing that we balance out, kind of like the sad music. Sometimes you're going to need to isolate yourself, right? And you want to get to a place where we can do that purposefully and intentionally versus just habitually. Okay? So now this is the one I wanted to talk about more. This last one here, this was the most common response with crying was a lot of people are drinking alcohol to move through grief. Now, I want to talk about why we shouldn't do that. And the easiest way, or if I take out the word should, it's when we use alcohol as a way to move ourselves through grief, we're not actually dealing with the grief. So it's unfair. It's like trickery to tell yourself that you're drinking to deal with your grief, because the truth is you're not drinking to deal with your grief. You're drinking to not deal with it. You're drinking to not feel it. You're drinking to bypass it. And that is not sustainable. So I'm not going to ever tell you don't ever have a drink to ignore it for one day. When we want to look at it is like, when is that a habit and when does that habit become a problem? Okay, so another thing about alcohol, guys, is alcohol is a depressant. So grief in itself can lead us to depression just on its own. So if we're already in this space where we are prone or just wide open, like depression could come in at any moment. If we pair that with more depressing habits like drinking alcohol, then, depression plus depression equals more fucking depression. So that's a huge one for me. And I'm not saying stop drinking alcohol and you don't have to give it up for life. But in terms of if you're using it or you think you're using it as a way to deal with your grief, I would invite you into this space of really asking yourself, is that why? Is that why? Because deep down, I would think that that we know just by drinking. Because unless you're drinking and doing some journaling or some heavy fucking meditation, if you're just drinking and sitting on the couch watching, what's the show everybody watches, but I don't, The Bachelor. I know nothing about The Bachelor, so I hear about it, and I know nothing about what anybody's talking about. But if that's how you think you're processing your grief, that's not processing. That's called numbing out. And that's something we're going to stop doing. Okay, so let's end this powerfully with some starts. We have our keeps, we have our stops. Now, what can we start doing to powerfully move ourselves through grief? So I think you already know some of my answers here. To me, it's if you have to face it and you have to feel it. And my favorite way to face grief and to feel grief is by moving my body. So I encourage you all to move your body more. If moving your body doesn't sound like it's something that's up your alley, start with touching your body, receiving touch. Go get a massage. Hold yourself, let yourself be held. These are really great ways to start dealing with your grief. Because when people talk about it, it comes up for me. I feel this grief. Well, where the fuck do you feel it? You feel it in your body. And so the only way to keep feeling it is to turn your attention, your direction inward and actually feel it, and then let yourself move through it. Another thing I want you guys to start doing is start talking about your people. That's what helps me with my dad, honestly. Honor your loved one. You can honor them in some way by just talking them. You can keep them, I think I said talking them. I don't know if I said that, but if I did talk about them, you can keep them alive through your service to the world. You can do good deeds just in their memory. You don't even have to tell anyone. You just know. You just know I'm doing this in, so-and-so's memory, and that's good enough for you. So I want to talk about something else. We talked about a keep is this inward reflection of therapy. And what I want to encourage you guys to do is keep going to therapy even when things are good. This is something that I feel very strongly about. I talk to my therapist about it all the time. And sometimes I go to see him and things are so good that I actually will keep notes. So sometimes I'll make an appointment. You might have even had this experience where you make an appointment and you can't get in that day. You have to wait a few weeks until you actually go to the appointment. And by the time you get to the appointment, you forgot why you made it. So I keep notes of these things. And then even when things are good, I keep going to therapy because it's so good just to keep sharing and keep checking in with at least one person in the world. So earlier in the episode, I shared that in many ways, my dad's loss is the origin story of I'm Wearing Pajamas. And that's because from the moment I set out on this journey to really just be happy, I knew that this type of journey, like this path of ease and of slow and steady living, I knew it could have really helped my dad. And honestly, I think had he had these tools that I'm giving you now, I think there's a chance that he could have lived just a longer and a healthier and a happier life. And because I feel that to be so true about my dad, like I'm shaking, I feel so true just in my body that I know that it's possible for people who are still living. Like if it could have been true for him, it's possible for you. And so that's why I want to give you access to these tools so that when you do inevitably find yourself in the storm of loss and you're like completely soaked in grief, you know how to make your way through. Now, instead of looking at grief like a tornado, I like to look at grief and life really as a spiral staircase, this upward spiraling staircase. And when I even imagine it, it's a spiraling staircase. It's moving upward, but it's never going straight. Sometimes it's sideways, like it's moving like tilted. And then I think about it kind of like a merry-go-round. So it's also not stationary or still. That's life, right? And I think about it like that because sometimes when you're on the path of moving through grief, it can feel like you're spinning in circles and not really going anywhere. Like how many of you have had that feeling? Like you're driving in the car, and I have this experience sometimes where I'll drive by the graveyard where my dad is buried, and I just feel tears, and sometimes I'm like, fuck, this again? I thought I dealt with this. But honestly, in reality, what's happening when we find ourselves in these moments of, fuck, I thought I dealt with this grief. Why is this still here? It's not that we're running into something old that we've never encountered. It's that we're hitting a brand new step. We're on that spiral staircase and we're moving upward. And so that new feeling of discomfort, that new charge within, it's not this again. It's, oh, this is new. This is to be invited. This is to be welcomed. It's this new layer of your grief. If you can imagine grief kind of like a cocoon, like honestly, that's kind of what it is in a way. Like if you think about it, caterpillars they really have to trust their intuition. And then they wrap themselves up into total darkness. And then only after they become like complete mush can they emerge as this butterfly. And so every single time you meet your grief and you feel it, you have this opportunity to turn into mush for a short time, like the butterfly, right? They don't stay like that. They turn into mush. And then you can choose to emerge. And that's you moving yourself forward. And really, that's the goal. That's the whole goal of all of this, just to keep moving forward. A friend of mine recently wrote me and described her experience with grief as an illness. And in a way, I can see her connection, because grief is a never-ending journey. And if anyone who comes up to you and they're like, oh, I've dealt with my grief, I'm done, they're fucking lying. You can just tell them right now, if they have a problem, send them to this podcast and they can come find me. But it's just, grief is a never-ending journey. And it's a never-ending journey because it's just part of life. And my friend told me that it lays dormant for a time and then it hits me out of nowhere. And guys, that's how it feels for me sometimes too. Because there's this cyclical cycle with grief. It moves in circles. And sometimes that's seasonal. Sometimes it really is out of nowhere. And we'll keep talking about this. I do want to dive into grief being seasonal. And so maybe next time we'll explore that a bit more. But for today, I want to invite you into this space of like, what if? What if, instead of seeing grief as illness, as something to fear, what if we can see grief as something to welcome, like an old friend? I don't know much about the stages of grief, but I do know that the last stage, it has to do with hope. And from my experience, people who have profound hope, they often have that hope because they have also felt profound loss or grief. And so remember, even though I said this is a last stage, is this hope, we don't live there. We cycle through. You're going to come back again and again, and you're going to move through grief. And sometimes you're going to fly through grief and you're going to feel like that butterfly, proud and open and light. And sometimes you feel like the caterpillar who has turned to mush. And that's why it's important to just remind yourself that you have tools. And all you have to do is just keep going. So I hope this list of things to keep, to stop, to start, I hope it's been helpful. Up next, we're going to chat about how to support others through loss. Honestly, giving them the list we just made might be helpful, but I have more tools, so let's keep going. When Dad died, I noticed a common theme that no one really talks about when loss is experienced. And it's we all want to provide comfort and support, but most of us don't really know how. And as a result, we often communicate with those who are grieving in a way that we leave and we've just made ourselves feel better. And so, although we might be well-intended, this can leave those grieving feeling more burdened or even more alone. So I want to start with, what do we say when someone experiences loss? After my dad passed away, the most common message I got was, I'm sorry for your loss. And then it was often followed by, please let me know if I can do anything for you. And from what I see, that seems like a pretty common response. We tell people we're sorry because we care and we want to say something. And then I feel like most people want to do something too, but we don't know what to do. So then we tell the person, just let me know what to do, because I'll do anything. I'll do anything. Just tell me. And I know that sorry is well intended, but when you're the person experiencing loss, it becomes somewhat awkward to respond with thank you or a weird smile after people repeatedly share their most sincere apology about your loved one passing. And you don't really know what you need in times of loss. So telling a grieving person, tell me what you need, really just gives them more to do. So to prepare you for the future, I'm going to share 5 empowering tools to add to your, we're going to call this your being a supportive human tool belt. Because I kind of feel like that's what this show's all about. Being a supportive human from your pajamas, doing the what you can. It's almost bare minimum. But anyway, because really it's all about just being a good human. Because these tools, they work with grief, but honestly, they can also work within the context of just helping you care and support for other people. Okay, so step 1 is be willing to give space, to hold space, and to listen. My friend Eric said, sometimes words don't help, so I provide comfort instead. I love that. Guys, take your time in sending that direct message and send a card or flowers or a plant through the mail instead. Maybe just leave it on their porch. Allow them to respond in their own time, and honestly, do not take it personally if they never respond. Because you have to remember, their entire world just changed. And so you can offer to listen. I once heard a wise teacher say that he had bottomless ears. They never fill up. And I believe those are the best kinds of ears that you could have while supporting someone through loss. Just listen. No words are ever needed. You can listen and just breathe with them. And then remember to feed them and keep them hydrated. And so that takes us to number 2, step 2. So speaking of food, the next easiest thing you can do is provide a meal. Set up a meal train, have dinner delivered, drop off a meal that's easy for them to prepare. You can send a gift card, bring them groceries. Guys, you know the essentials, bring them those. I'm selfish in a way. I bring people what I like. So much happens after loss and people still need to eat. And so you can make life so much easier by just go feed people. That was my dad's love language. My dad liked to show you through feeding you. So if my dad ever fed you, if I've ever fed you, it means we love you. Step 3 is you can make an offering. So like I mentioned earlier, in times of loss, most people say, tell me what to do. And instead of putting the work on that person grieving, you tell them what you can do for them. Send them a gift certificate for a massage. That's honestly my go-to, because when my dad died, my body hurt so badly, just physical pain. I never knew that was possible, guys. You never know these things until they happen to you. And when my dad died, my body literally hurt. And my dad died on a Wednesday, and on Saturday I was back in yoga because I needed to move my body. But until then, yoga, massage, whatever you can do. But most often what I do when someone I know has lost someone, I find out where they enjoy receiving massages, if that's a practice already, and then I just send them a gift certificate. Back when I practiced Thai yoga, it's similar to massage. It's more like moving yoga. You move people in and out of yoga poses. When I practiced Thai yoga, if someone lost someone, I had a friend lose a pet. I told him, come see me. This is what I know I can do for you, and I know it helps. You can offer to take their kids wherever they need to go. Go be a taxi. Donate your services, whatever they are, your time, your energy. Send them Netflix gift cards, some yummy treats, fill their car up with gas, go do their laundry, clean their bathroom, walk their dogs. Guys, there are things you can do. And it is so much more empowering and powerful as a person. You will feel more powerful as a person when you start telling people what you can do. I bought you a massage. Go get it. Here. It's so much more empowering versus, I'm so sorry, tell me what I can do. Right? You know what you can do. Go do it. So then the next step is huge also. Number 4 is, guys, you have to save your questions and your fix-its, because it's not the time to ask questions, and it's not your job to fix or heal anybody. You have to let people grieve, and you have to allow people to grieve, yourself included, in your own way and in your own time. And I want you to prepare yourself, because it can be messy. And so what you can do most for people, if you're not the one grieving, you can just do your best to keep them safe. And I want you to know that sometimes it's going to be uncomfortable. And when it's uncomfortable, you go to listen to our episode on discomfort, so you know how to handle that shit. But it's okay, because it's not about you and your comfort. And remember, in those moments of discomfort, that's when we get to grow. Being effectively supportive for others, it really stems from putting your own discomfort aside and providing a safe space for healing to happen, right? And if you can't set your discomfort aside to do that, then you shouldn't be there. Step 5 is make a contribution in honor of their loved one. And do something kind for someone else, contribute to a cause. Maybe you have the funding to set up a scholarship fund, or you want to give in their name or erect a plaque of some sort, or a banner or a statue. You can do what you can to carry on the legacy of their loved one. One of the things I like, and this is a very small contribution, and I want to give you this, is I love when people contribute stories to my life about my dad. I also love when I go somewhere and someone recognizes me because they can see my dad in me, or maybe they knew me through my dad. So you can make a contribution to others by talking about their loved one too, and sharing the stories that maybe there's a way, or often there's a time, especially people who were like friends with my dad. I wasn't around at that time, and so it's nice to hear these stories that I didn't know about. And so I think it's really cool to have these opportunities to learn more and to just grow in grief. When I asked my social media followers to talk to me about grief, one thing that kept being repeated was allow grief to happen, but don't force yourself to go it alone. My friend Christine, when she went as far as to say, it's actually better to not handle it alone because not everyone has the skill set to filter through. And like I said earlier, my friend Eric warned that you can drown in it, so be careful. And I think those are such important reminders, because we really just don't. We don't always have the skill sets to meet life as it meets us. And those are the opportunities when we do get to grow and we get to learn. And so grief is uncomfortable, but like we learned last week, discomfort is just part of the journey. So before we wrap up, I want to tell you just a little bit about my journey with grief. So I feel like a lot of my journey actually could be summed up in our keep, stop, start list. So in the beginning of my journey with grief, like I've mentioned before, I had yoga, or I think I've mentioned it before, maybe not here, but I had yoga when my dad died. And so I already had a practice of coming to self. I had a breathing practice. And I feel like for me, that was a big savior in my journey with grief. Because, and then especially right after my dad died, when I signed up for yoga teacher training, that just put me right into a lot of really powerful work. And so immediately in the beginning, I went into processing my dad's death. Now, one of the things I want to talk to you guys about is, so I had some deep clarity around my dad dying. I understood it. And so I say that because I realize for me, I feel like my loss with my dad, because I could see it coming, I almost had a head start on my process of grief. And so without going into like a super long story, I'll say it like this. My dad, in his last few years of life, he just stopped taking care of himself. And as a result of that, I could see him just going downhill. And if we look back actually even at images of my dad in the last few years of life, that he even looked like he aged, like just so much age, so it went on him so quickly. And I think it's just as a result of he stopped caring for self. Okay, so because I could see this happening, I saw my dad going downhill. My dad was close to 50. My dad passed away when he was 48. And before then, I can't remember if he was 48 or 47, but just a few years before then, I had said to my sisters, if dad keeps walking this path, he's not going to make it to 50. Like, I saw it clear as day. So when it happened, I was surprised in the sense of, it's not like I expected it on a Wednesday in November. I saw it coming. So I still had this element of obviously surprise, but I had this resolve with it because I felt like I could see it coming. I knew it. I understood it. And as a result of that, I didn't prepare for it. Like, I didn't grieve my dad being gone before he was gone. But once he was gone, having that clarity gave me closure. because watching my dad not take care of himself told me that he didn't really want to be here anymore. So when he passed away, I actually used to say he passed away of a broken heart. He was just sad. He didn't want to do this journey anymore. So when he passed away, I had a lot of understanding, and that doesn't mean I didn't have grief to deal with. So I still have grief. I sort of feel like, I'm not going to lie, I feel like it's almost like an unfair advantage. I don't know how I will experience or respond to grief the day it happens to me completely out of the blue, unexpectedly. I'd like to say that I'll come back to this podcast and listen to my own advice, but we never know. So where I was when my dad passed, right, I had this understanding, but I didn't really have all the tools. And back then I dealt with my, anything I didn't want to deal with, I numbed out with alcohol. So I had a drinking problem. So in the early days of my grief, I numbed out. So I went to yoga to process some of it, and I did process some of it, but I still had a drinking problem. And until I got alcohol out of my life, I couldn't really fully deal with it. So I've been alcohol free for a while now. I think completely alcohol free, like no alcohol in my system, definitely over a year. I was actually super proud. I went through the whole pandemic. I had no alcohol. I definitely used cannabis, but I'd consider cannabis a plant medicine, and I use it as such. But I really, back then I had a drinking problem, and so I numbed out for a long time. And then eventually, once I gave that up, I allowed myself to actually process and move through. And that's where we are today. I'm still coming out of my shell, starting to share and talk with everyone more. So for me, grief, like I said earlier, it's a journey. I don't ever expect that I will get to the day and be like, hey, I'm done. I don't grieve my dad anymore. I will absolutely grieve my dad till the day I die, because I love my dad immensely. And so to me, that's what's kind of powerful, and what we can welcome about grief is, because just telling you guys that, I got tears in my eyes and my heart started to flutter. And if I didn't let myself feel that and didn't tell you about that, I wouldn't have had this experience. And the experience that I'm having right now is I feel uplifted. I feel really happy. I love talking about my dad. And so I love being in this space where I can do this work. I can be honest with you and share. I'm still doing it too. I'm learning as we go, because remember, moving through grief is it's like climbing a mountain with no top. And the climb is constant, and your speed is always changing to move with your surroundings and with the seasons. But in grief, climbing this mountain, there's going to be times that you're going to climb upward and moments where you're going to slide your ass right back down. And sometimes you might even crash and burn. There's going to be twists, there's going to be turns, and hopefully there's many, many moments of stillness and rest. Guys, these are all pieces to processing grief. Nearly 10 years have passed for me since my dad left us, and my life looks very different from how it did the day he died. But one thing I'm super proud to share is this. I did remain true to my promise, and I continued to seek happiness, and it led me here to you. So, dear friends, I hope you found something incredibly valuable in this episode. Honestly, there's so much. I think this is our longest one yet. There's so much packed in here. You might want to come back to it again and again and again. And fuck, I hope you do. If you want to dive deeper into this topic, connect with me. I would love to hear from you. I promise I respond to every message. So just always give me time. Leave us a message. You can call the show directly. Remember, at anchor.fm/I'm Wearing Pajamas. I'd love to hear you talk live on the show, so please get some messages to us. Guys, I will miss you so much while we're apart. Until then, I'm wearing pajamas. Family, thank you so much for listening. Together, we will go so far. I want to stay connected with you. Come follow me on Instagram. I'm at yogameg108. You can also visit my website to come train with me in person. My website is empoweredstillness.com. That's the letter M, poweredstillness.com. Be sure to rate, subscribe, and review I'm Wearing Pajamas wherever you get your podcasts. And if you enjoyed listening and maybe you find you're learning something here, then please consider supporting us at anchor.fm/I'm Wearing Pajamas for as little as 99 cents each month. It's so easy. Go to anchor.fm, that's anchor.fm/I'm Wearing Pajamas, and click that support button. You can't miss it. Thank you for spending time with us. I love you. I'm here with you. Until next time, I'm wearing pajamas.